Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome. I know. So I want to first point out, particularly for the school committee members and anybody who will be up presenting and speaking this evening, that our secretary, Beth Petter, is not with us this evening. She'll be taking minutes after the fact by watching the YouTube video. So I'm just going to ask both for committee members and for members of the public and presenters, please do speak clearly and into your microphone so that it can be captured for the recording. And with that being said, thank you for waiting while we were in executive session. As you all now know, we are being recorded for both ActonTV's YouTube channel and also for Beth to be able to take minutes for us. You can watch our meetings on ActonTV's YouTube channel, which is found at the top of this page, at the top of our agenda. We do have a fairly packed agenda this evening, and I see we've got a lot of folks in the room. So before we get into our student representative update, I just want to get a show of hands for our next agenda item around public participation. How many people here, through a show of hands, are here to actually speak at the microphone so I can allot the time appropriately? Excellent. So a lot of supporters and a couple speakers. Sorry, did I see some over there? Yeah, a couple. One, two. All right. Great. Thank you. So with that, I would like to invite up some of our ABRHS student representatives. We're happy to have you come report with us monthly to share some of the student perspective of the current events at the high school. There you go. Welcome, Molly.
Hi. It's just me today. There's an orchestra concert, and that's where Diksha and Julia are, and I don't know where the other two are, but Diksha and Julia wanted me to apologize for them. They have an orchestra concert.
Thank you.
Yes. I'm Molly. I'm a junior, and today I want to talk about the Halloween costumes. I'm frustrated with the fact that kids were not allowed to wear Halloween costumes in the elementary schools and junior high this year. Just a quick note, when I practiced this at home, my 9-year-old brother wanted me to add something about Halloween candy, but I'm not going to go there because everyone I have talked to, including students and adults in my life, think this is nonsensical and a rule that has come into place for no good reason. The reasons given by the school committee and by flyers and emails sent out by the elementary school and junior high were cultural opposition and not being able to afford costumes. In regard to cultural opposition, religion is often used as the main reasoning. This situation is not dissimilar to parents who ask for certain books to be banned because of their religious beliefs, and we all know how that went. This situation is almost the same. People are using their personal religion as an excuse to ban Halloween costumes. Religion should not play a part in schools, as is said in the Constitution. This means we should not be banning kids from wearing Halloween costumes because it goes against the religion of some of their peers. This is like saying girls can't wear pants to school because some religions are against it. Then there's the issue of price. Kids make a choice whether or not they want to dress up. Growing up, there were always a few kids who chose not to dress up, and that was okay. They would still participate in the small Halloween events, and they generally did not have an issue with it. And besides, often the most creative Halloween costumes are homemade and cost little to no money. I made my own personal Duolingo costume with materials I had at home, and it cost me close to nothing. I am very grateful that I got to wear it to school, and I got some good reactions. There are socioeconomic disparities at all schools, and it's the responsibility of the school to make sure every child is included. Overall, it's important for kids to have joy as part of their schooling experience, and Halloween is a great way to provide that opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Molly. Okay, next item is public participation. So per our school committee policy, members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes. We'll keep 3 minutes for this evening, but we will dedicate a maximum of 20 minutes to public participation this evening. Speakers must be recognized by the chair before speaking, and as a reminder, the committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation, and for those of you who haven't been with us for a while, this is the only time that the public will be invited to address the committee, so we do not take public comments during the meeting anymore, just at the beginning. So if there are folks who wish to speak, please step forward to the mic, please give us your name, and then I know we've got a couple people, so if you wouldn't mind queuing up as well, that would be great.
Good evening. For the folks watching at home, my name is Mike Balulescu. I'm an Acton resident, Merriam parent, and president of the ABEA, our district's teachers union. I'm here tonight to ask you to take bold action to make sure our schools are fully funded. With next year's anticipated budget deficit of $7 million, we must seek an operational override this spring. We have no choice. Our students and our staff are counting on you to deliver us the funding we need to do our vital work here in Acton and Boxborough. I don't need to tell you on this committee that the past 2 years have been challenging for our educators. The needs of our students and our families continue to grow and change and evolve. And rather than meet the moment with more resources and more supports, we have cut critical staff positions for 2 years running. As a district, we have big and important and laudable goals. And yet, while we rightfully demand the very best for our students, we have not committed to giving our teachers and administrators the resources they need. We continue to burn through the finite energy of our staff, relying on more of their early mornings and late nights and weekends to get our critical work done, rather than asking the taxpayers to contribute more to the true cost of a high-quality public school system. When the voters ask why we need an operational override, we need you to tell the truth and fight for our students and staff. We need you to tell them that the cost of effective special education services is significant and necessary. We need you to tell them that the cost of maintaining our buildings and providing safe learning and working conditions is significant and necessary. And yes, we need you to tell them that the cost of attracting, hiring, and retaining our world-class faculty is significant and necessary. As an Acton taxpayer, I know what I'm asking you for, and I recognize that a successful override campaign will not be easy. Nevertheless, as an Acton resident for almost 10 years and an R.J. Gray teacher for almost 20 years, I've come to know our towns as communities where support for public education runs deep. If the need is stated clearly, and if the case is made persuasively, voters will show up and support our students and our staff. As educators, we go above and beyond every day for our students. Now we need you to step up and do the same. Please be our advocates. Lead the way. Tell our communities that we need an override to fully fund our schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Judith Ehrenstein. I'm a resident of Acton. I'm coordinator of Mothers Out Front Acton. We're a national group with state and local chapters. I'm here to show unconditional support for the resource force resolution that they're asking you to support. This is mostly, our focus has been on, in the past, gas leaks in Acton, and we worked with the resource force a number of years ago, bringing attention to gas leaks, and now they're working on building electrification and transportation and other machinery. Anyways, I feel like what's important to say is that given the climate and the overwhelming concern for the health and safety of our children and all the children in this town, that the young people of Acton are really standing up, and the resource forces here in quite large numbers. I feel like their work and this resolution, which was incredibly comprehensive, Mothers Out Front really felt like we need to stand up behind them. We also, as a group, have decided to work on electric bus campaign, and that meshes quite nicely with what they're doing, and we want to support them in any way possible. That's all. We hope that you go and support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Scott Smyers, 382 Central Street. Can you explain the public participation being truncated to right now, whereas how are we supposed to have a discussion about an important topic you're supposed to present about later, and we came to hear some more information about it and then have some questions, and now we can't? And I know you don't have to answer this question right now, but I'd really like it if you did.
I'm happy to, Scott. So about 3 or 4 meetings ago, we did announce a change to the public participation policy. So I'm not going to go in depth. Actually, it's not a change to the policy. It's just the way we're managing public participation.
Yeah.
And part of the reason was so that you could ask questions at this time of the meeting that could then be help inform the discussion of the committee when we get the presentation later on. And so what I would invite you to do is go back, I think about 2 or 3 meetings ago, and watch the recording where we discussed why we were making a change to public participation.
But you didn't make a change to the policy. You
Nope.
just on the fly, just stopping people from asking questions. So
Members of
that's-
the public are welcome to ask questions. We're just limiting that to the beginning of the meeting, which is still consistent with our
It's
policy.
not really the same as any other public meeting or Robert's rules and that sort of thing. So you might want to have your council look into that. On a different topic that you should have your council look into is whether or not the town has to pay for the new residents that are coming to town that are living at the Acton Minuteman Inn that we heard an update a couple of weeks ago. And now I guess there's no more update on that. You would think that would be a hot topic when a whole bunch of people are moving to town that we don't know that much about, that the state has supposedly forced into our town. And our own legal minds haven't apparently looked into it to find out that the spirit of the law, the right to shelter law, is not for this purpose. You know, are we being bamboozled? Is somebody from the town going to sue, you know, the different representatives of the town committees that are allowing this to go forward? There's a lot of questions with this, and I advise you to look into it. And please, you know, let us ask questions after you give us some information. Don't try to hide. This is just a way for you to gain power, move forward, and stop people from asking questions. Then you get all this support for the
30 seconds.
override that is a surprise. So my question is, how is this possibly a surprise, $7 million? And this is possibly incompetence of the people in charge of maintaining the budget. You know, so we need to have a serious discussion about this. I don't think it's going to be solved by getting people in support of T-shirts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Corinne Hogseth. I also want to talk about the override. Anyone that was at the town meeting in May 22 probably recalls a proposed amendment to the budget to the schools, to Acton's assessment that year to reduce it by $1.26 million, which was Acton's share, I believe, of the amount of the budget that was coming from E&D. And the point was that there were big deficits being projected in the out years, and there was this continuing reliance on rainy day funds and one-time sources of funding for ongoing operations. And several of us stood up and made the point that this was an unsustainable course to be on. And here we are a year and a half later, and there's a $7 million surprise. $4.6 million of it, I think, is salaries, which most of it is under contract. So how that could possibly be a surprise, I'll never understand. So I guess the rules of thumb, and you guys know better than I, for seeking an override is that you have to demonstrate that you've been good stewards of our money, that you have plans for the money, and that you've done everything you can to avoid this override. I think you fail on number one. I'm sure you know what you want to spend the money on, but I'm not sure it's necessarily aligns with the priorities of the taxpayers. And three, you have to go through and scrub every line in your budget and get rid of the nice-to-haves. And you know, you're at a time we don't have room in our lives or our budgets or in our household budgets for the nice-to-haves. You know, like we've already seen a huge increase in our taxes for the new schools. The town is going to have to put off a debt exclusion override now for the Public Works building because of this surprise. So again, I would ask you to go back, sharpen your pencils. We love our teachers, but we're not talking. But like I said, there's stuff in that budget that doesn't need to be there. I've harped on all-day K for years, and I'll go back to that one. It's free daycare, so you can start there. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Carol Enright. I live at 44 Brewster Lane. Just like to respond a little bit and to give another side to what's been mentioned about folks who are moving here, who are at the area on Route 2. And I don't think they're there yet, but I understand there are about 60% of the families from Haiti, mostly, who are children, and they'll be in our schools. this is a wonderful opportunity to welcome people. They are amazing folks. I've lived in Haiti. I don't think we listen properly when we just read the headlines. You have people, and I'll say this quickly, who for 5 years have been in Chile, they've learned Spanish, they've come up, they've gone over through Mexico, they've done so much to get here, and now they're here, and I think there's a lot of us who would welcome them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments from the public? Excellent. Thank you. We are going to move on to the superintendent's update. Peter, you were jumping the gun, weren't you?
I was excited for the students to present. Superintendent's update, I just want to do some congratulations first. So first is to our high school student Jessica Tao for winning the Best Digital Arts Submission in the high school division of the Massachusetts Foreign Language Association contest, Building Global Perspectives Through the Power of Language. So congratulations, Jessica. I want to congratulate another one of our high school students, senior Timothy Airbus, for being accepted to the American Junior Academy of Sciences Symposium for his project on achieving precision in autonomous rocket landings with convolutional neural networks and control algorithms. Sheri's going to be presenting more on that later, giving us a full explanation. And then also, I just want to congratulate the entire high school marching band for winning a silver medal at the Michael Finals. So congratulations to those groups. We also held our first multilingual night on Thursday, October 26th, and welcomed a lot of our multilingual families from across the district. And I will just also highlight that, you know, a real personal joy that I have has been committing to more time in classrooms this year. So this year I had an opportunity to visit Blanchard, RJ Gray, and actually briefly Conant today to just see some classrooms in action. And I was able to pass my 70th classroom of the year so far, so it's been great. Our educators are amazing. The work that they're doing with students, our students are amazing, and it's certainly the highlight of the work that I get to do. So thank you for all of the people who have entertained me in classrooms.
Excellent.
That's it.
Thanks, Peter. Any questions for Peter on his exciting news? Wonderful. Okay, so now we are going to invite the resource force up to present. And Peter's going to get your slides up and going. So I believe we've got Sneha, Tanish, and Austin here to present this evening.
Sorry, it's me and Alex, actually.
Okay. Well, welcome. Why don't you guys, once your presentation's up, give us a quick introduction and then go through your material. I just read the names on the agenda. That's all I'm here for.
Hi, my name is Sneha Iyer,
I'm Alex Hua.
and we're both juniors at ABRHS and part of Resource Force. Today we're here to present about decarbonizing the school district.
So the environmentalist and author Bill McKibben once wrote that winning slowly is the same as losing. We'd like you to keep this quote in mind during our presentation.
So a little bit about who we are and what we are doing. Resource Force is a student-led team at Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. Our group focuses on fighting climate change primarily at the local level. A year and a half ago, we successfully advocated for an increase in renewable energy content in the standard level of Acton Power Choice. Acton Power Choice is the town's community aggregation program that bulk purchases electricity and sells it to the town residents at a lower rate. Last June, we sent to the school committee a resolution to decarbonize the school district, and today we're here to talk about it.
While change cannot happen all at once, we want the school committee to make a commitment to fighting climate change. As you all know, there was a large storm about a month ago that delayed school dismissal, disrupted bus routes, and even knocked down a flagpole in front of the high school. Extreme weather events like these will become more and more frequent due to climate change, as well as increased maintenance and repair costs. Climate change will also result in a decrease in food security, especially for low-income families.
Long-term effects of climate change also affect children. Climate change increased cases of asthma between 4 and 11%, and asthma-related emergency department visits are projected to increase a substantial 17 to 30% each year. An estimated 1 to over 2 million children will experience some form of displacement due to rising sea levels. Climate change is an existential threat. It is our future at stake if we do nothing.
So why focus on the school district? Well, the district produced 12,722 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in 2017, and it has the largest municipal carbon footprint in terms of electricity and natural gas by far. This graph from the Acton greenhouse gas inventory clearly shows the outsized impact the school district has on emissions. And that's why it's so important to decarbonize the school district. Not only because it'll reduce the carbon footprint, but also to set an example. The school district is one of the most visible parts of our community, and we must be a leading figure on the path to net zero.
Now all of this brings us to our ask. As a public entity, we must move along with the town and state government in climate initiatives. The town of Acton passed a climate action plan last year, and Massachusetts has a policy committing itself to net zero by 2050. It is time for the school district to make a substantial policy commitment as well. First, the district should commit to purchasing 100% of its electricity from renewable sources. We believe this commitment to be an essential step forward to the district, and it is one that has already been implemented in the past. We also ask the district to integrate on-site solar and battery storage to its fullest extent as soon as possible. The district should also make a substantial commitment to electrification now. We ask that the committee pass a policy to electrify all school buses by 2026, electrify all grounds equipment and other vehicles by 2030, and electrify all buildings, including any new construction, by 2045. To ensure the district is advancing towards its goals and the public is kept informed about its progress, we also ask the district to publish an annual progress report.
We understand that many of our asks will require a substantial amount of money and that the school district has many budgetary restraints that will make these goals difficult to achieve. We are not asking for these changes to be made right away. Our goal is to have a written commitment from the school district that these changes will happen and that it will take the steps to reach net zero. Going back to the quote from the beginning of our presentation, winning slowly is the same as losing. Progress must start as soon as possible. If we wait even 5 years, that's 5 years worth more greenhouse gas emissions that will be added to the atmosphere. We have to act on this here and now, and we cannot postpone action any further.
Here we have a few relevant sources that can be referenced. First is the greenhouse gas inventory, which we used some statistics in our presentation from. It includes a detailed breakdown of emissions in Acton. Beverly has already started implementing their own sustainability plan since 2020. And employs 5 fully electric school buses and 10 hybrid school buses. We have linked their sustainability plan here for you. Also linked are the Acton Climate Action Plan and the Electrification Roadmap. The Acton Climate Action Plan details actions the town will take to fight climate change, and the Acton Electrification Roadmap, which is a study on the electrification of multiple municipal buildings, includes the Parker Damon Building, junior high, and high school. Both are very important documents in understanding not only Acton's commitment to sustainability, but also its steps forward it can take to electrify.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the committee? Vikram.
I want to say thank you very much for your presentation. I wholeheartedly agree with you. I think it's vitally important we start implementing these things as soon as possible.
Hi, folks. I also just wanted to say thank you. I appreciate how thoughtful your resolution was, how you provided links to sources and other things for us to reference. And they had reached out to me to meet before and really had a thoughtful discussion about these things are really important for us and really time sensitive given where we are with our climate and the fact that it's our futures. And we recognize budgetary issues. And so I wanted to appreciate that you were able to hold that nuance, but also still wanted to push our district forward. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we can incorporate some of these things as we have our committee discussions. So thank you.
Real quickly, I just want to congratulate you on such a great presentation. And the other nice thing about this is it dovetails with the state's push for net carbon net zero in terms of the goals set out by the governor back in 2021. So excellent job. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Anyone else? Excellent. Well, Sneha, thank you guys very much for your presentation this evening. Okay, we are going to move on to new business. First item is a presentation from our administration, Peter, Sheri, and Andrew, on some of the early budget projections for FY25. So for those of you who've not been with us through a budget cycle before, we are probably about a month and a half, 2 months earlier than we typically are in terms of presenting budget numbers and roll-ups for next year. But I think you'll see in the presentation tonight that some of the early estimates are pretty concerning, and that's why the administration did a significant job of preparing some material for us now so we can begin to have these discussions sooner.
All right, so good evening, everyone. First, I just want to take an opportunity and thank Sheri Matthews and the entire finance team, and Andrew Shen and the entire HR team. As Adam just mentioned, we are typically working on our school budget from about November until December, kind of at the really high level. But then they really start focusing in on rolling up salaries for all of our individual staff and everything else, really in the December, January, and even February timeframes. And the work that we're typically doing in January and February has now been completed, where all of the staff projections for next year, all 1,000 employees, have all been rolled up into next year, contracts accounted for, different aspects of the budget, so that we could come and get a projection. I think one of the things we're keenly aware of as a district, that it's no surprise that we have a budget challenge in FY25. We've known for several years now that we have a budget that has a structural challenge, that there are aspects of a school department budget, and we're not unique, but as long as we have aspects of a school department budget that can't be controlled to 3% or under, we're always going to be in a challenging position as a school district. And so when I talk about that, I talk about things like health insurance, I talk about things like retirement contributions that are required by law, and I talk about things like post-employment trust benefits and things like that. Those are all just some sample elements that escalate annually at a rate that far exceeds the available resources of a community. And so when I talk about a structural problem, that's really what I'm focused on, that there are elements of a school budget that just can't be solved individually by a school. They can be influenced, but they can't necessarily be solved. Additionally, we're seeing some aspects of the school budget that are really one-time anomalies that are driving our expenses. Some of them are post-COVID related, some of them are inflationary pressures, and some of them are some concerns around our health insurance trust that we spoke about at the last meeting that are really coming to fruition. We'll talk about that more later tonight and as part of this presentation. But knowing the gravity of the situation as we saw this unfold, we wanted to come to you tonight with some early budget projections. I want to give you some notes on this, that these are projections. This is a projection based on what's called a level services budget model. And that means that we're assuming that we will provide the same services and programs next year that we currently provide. It is a model, it is not our budget proposal. Our budget proposal will come in January, but it's a model so that we can inform you of what we're seeing within the budget and what it would cost to operate our programs next year, so that as you then develop your guidelines, you're able to set the priorities that will allow us to do what we need to as administration in developing a budget proposal for January. We're going to talk about a few things tonight. We're going to give you a high-level overview of revenue, reserves, and assessment projections. We're going to talk about expenses, and we're going to talk about what happened that we ended in this position this year. Overall, we're not being shy, and we're just coming right out and saying our expenses are projected to exceed revenues by about $7 million. That changed in the last 48 hours as we learned more from Health Insurance Trust, and I will talk about that as the evening goes on. We're not going to go into some of the details of this. There is a more detailed memo in your packet with information about this, but the presentation tonight is just really a high-level snapshot highlighting some of the pieces of that memo. Overall, revenues, reserves, and assessments. Revenues to the district fall into, really three broad categories. One is state aid. We have some categories of other revenues, and we have some reserve usage. I'm just highlighting a few things that are going into our overall projection. In terms of state aid, for the last 2 years, we've been fortunate that the state increased at $60 a pupil. The standard rate that the state increases is $30 a pupil. They had some extra revenue. They recognized the post-COVID challenges schools were facing, and they increased for 2 years to 60. We are not projecting that right now. If it changes, we will certainly, change the projections. But we do know that state revenues are down, and we expect a more conservative budget out of the state than we've seen in the past. In addition, though, we know that we have been transporting some students out of district who qualify as for homeless transportation. If a student is homeless, the district in which they're attending school is responsible for providing the cost of those transportation. That does have a reimbursement formula that's calculated by the state. Because we know we've been doing that, we have included some transportation reimbursement in our state aid. So we're projecting about $300,000 in additional state aid next year beyond what we got this year. That's a little less than 1% increase. In terms of other revenue, most of this is projected as being flat. However, we are seeing Medicaid reimbursement this year come in about $35,000 below what we had budgeted for. And so we've adjusted that accordingly in our projections for next year. So there's a negative increase there. We also wanted to talk a little bit about reserve use, and I'll show you some of the reserve situation in the next slide. But right now we're using $1.375 million of this year's budget, of E&D in this year's budget. We've projected that at level at this time. We have taken out the money for capital stabilization, which is currently at $150,000. That is all subject to school committee discretion. So this could change based on the direction that you want to take. But we want to just highlight that for you, that we're taking out capital stabilization right now until we know what the need is. And then, when you sum that up, it means that we're going to have about $115,000 in additional revenues, not part of the two towns, that are coming into the district next year, which is about a 0.5% increase over current. When we calculated the assessment projections, basically we just work backwards, and this is not meant to be offensive to Boxborough, but we know Acton has been the constraining factor on the district over the last several years, and that Acton right now really can't afford under the tax levy an increase of more than 3%. Without triggering an operational override. And so we use that 3% cap to project revenues. And we just do some backwards math, and we're able to project that. That means that the available assessments from both towns, based on enrollment in the district over the last 3 years, probably is about 3.2 million, somewhere in that range. That can fluctuate based on how much we have in reserves, state aid, and there's more that will come as the budget develops. But we're projecting probably a total of about 3.2 million in available resources for next year as a school district. Want to just highlight some of the reserves. I'm going to highlight probably the two biggest reserve accounts that we have. One is excess and deficiency, which is applied after the budget, but before the assessments. And then the other is circuit breaker, which is applied as we calculate special education tuition costs within a budget. So that's within the budget. E&D is actually after the budget. E&D usage over the last 5 years, you can see the red line is the budget offset that has gradually increased over the last handful of years. We did decrease slightly this year. And then what you're seeing is the certified E&D balance over the last 5 years as well. So we've gone from about 3.6 million down to about 1.75 million in E&D. And you can see those lines are starting to converge. And that's not the sign that we want, obviously, as we look to what's going to be available in the next budget. E&D is essentially, for those of you that might be new, the emergency account for a school district. And so we've known that even as we've reduced a significant number of staff positions over the last few years, we knew that we needed to moderate the impact on students over the same period of time. So working with school committee, we chose to use some E&D to be able to, gradually reduce staffing positions and preserve, some of the services that we thought were critical. In terms of circuit breaker reserve is an account dedicated solely for special education purposes, and it is essentially funded through a reimbursement from the state from a prior year's special ed expenses that exceed a certain threshold. I'm not going to go into the details. What you can see in blue is the fund balance of that reserve account is projected at the end of this year to be just below $1 million. The revenue in is the green line, and we did see a slight dip that may very well go up in the next year because we're seeing higher cost for tuitions right now. And then similarly, the expenditures out are increasing as we're seeing some needs come in, and particularly as needs come in after the budget process. This is where circuit breaker is designed by the state to actually be the funding for that mechanism. So something to certainly keep an eye on, but we also are finding that we're going to have less circuit breaker available for some of the needs as we progress. Level services. So again, this is projecting what it costs now into next school year to provide the same programs and services we provide now next year. I'm only showing you the top drivers of this. So the top driver is personnel with about a $4.5 million variance. This includes a number of things. It includes, traditionally cost of living increases for employees based on the contracts that we have in place. It includes special education staff that were added after the budget process. So we've talked to you about this before, but we had a number of students move into the district, and we also had changes to service delivery for some of our students with disabilities that required us to add staff to meet required IEP minutes, and that is the law that we have to meet those minutes. But essentially we had to add a part-time nurse at the junior high school for some specific needs. We also had to add part-time BCBA at the junior high school as the Pathways program from Blanchard progressed into the middle level. And then we also had students who had required assistant hours where we had to add 7.5 assistants after the budget process closed last year. So that's really what we've added in staff. We did add 2 bus drivers as well because our routes, we had cut some bus drivers a couple of years ago thinking that we could do it. We did for a couple of years, but bus ridership increased again after the pandemic. We added 2 bus drivers, but those expenses are all, just as a reminder, are reimbursed from the state as well. So, it's an area that's not really one of our budget drivers, so you're not seeing bus drivers specifically called out on the slide. Substitutes, the cost of substitutes has gone up. It's been very challenging to get substitutes, and we're seeing higher needs for substitutes, but it's also hard to fill sub positions on a daily basis. We are anticipating that this is going to be a deficit this year, just as it was last year on the budget, and so we're trying to make sure that we correct that and don't continue to budget on a deficit for subs. Vacancy factor was the issue in the budget that we came to you earlier this year where we found an error in the vacancy factor. So we are trying to have a multi-year process to correct that error and not have the vacancy factor as a piece of the budget because we know that that has to be corrected. In terms of fringes, it's really 3 things that go into fringes in terms of drivers. One is health insurance costs, one is Middlesex County retirement, and one is OPEB. We're projecting the combination of those to go up $2.3 million. However, there's a big caveat on that based on information from Acton Health Insurance Trust, we may be adding $1 million to that number. So that really needs to be vetted. We'll talk more about that in a couple slides. Special education tuitions. Now this is the net use of circuit breaker. So we have higher costs for special ed tuitions. If you have been paying attention to a little known department in the state called the Operational Services Division, you will note that over the last 2 years, they will have allowed increases to out-of-district programs to 20% for tuitions. That is not sustainable for us. It's driving a huge change in this. It's one of the reasons that we're having to use more and more circuit breaker this year, but that means it's not available next year. And so we've had to reduce the use of circuit breaker in next year's budget, and we're dealing with tuitions that we're seeing 20% higher than what we've seen in the past. Special ed transportation is another area. We've actually, our typical provider, which is Case Collaborative, doesn't have capacity anymore because they can't find drivers. And so we've had to go out and, hire additional companies. Special ed, transportation right now, the going rate is sometimes $300 and $400 a day to transport a student. And so that's certainly been a driver for us. We also include in this line costs for students who might qualify for transportation under McKinney-Vento as being homeless or who are in foster care. Those are all obligations of the district. Facilities, you know, we had budgeted for this year a $200,000 facility subsidy for the Boardwalk campus building. That was an energy rebate that we anticipated once the building was fully operational and we had solar and battery storage on site. The battery storage and solar project is delayed right now, and so we don't have an end date for that, so we can't count on that subsidy. It's certainly not coming in during this fiscal year, so we're dealing with that $200,000 that we've lost, but we're not sure, and we really can't budget for it in next year's budget until we know what's happening with the Boardwalk campus project and the battery array. Capital and maintenance costs are going up exponentially. We have developed a capital plan that, you know, called for increases of around 2.5% per year now. We included those in this projection. That's certainly, you know, something just like everything else that's going to have to be up for discussion as we go through the budget process. And then we also pay some assessments to charter schools, sewer assessment to the town. That's coming in over budget right now. Charter assessments went back up on us. They had been down for a year. They're coming in back up. So this is just to pay the legally obligated assessments is another $200,000 of the problem we're seeing. So those are really the fixed costs that we talk about where, again, we can influence some of them, but we don't have full control over what we're doing with those. In terms of variable costs where we do have more control, we are projecting these right now here, but obviously we'll be discussing them. We're very fortunate that the town was generous with us in terms of sharing ARPA money, and we were fortunate to have received an earmark through the state legislature this year that allowed us to do some things creatively. But we funded about half of the cartwheel care program is still through an ARPA grant. That's obviously mental health services for students. Half of the Assabet Valley wraparound services grant is funded through ARPA, and then our resource center right now is funded through the state earmark. So those will be things that we have to make some decisions about in this budget. Ed Tech, we had reduced the budget by $100,000. They have subscription services, they have, you know, Wi-Fi access points that have to be maintained, networks, everything else. It's not a realistic reduction to have reduced them by $100,000. So we really need to bring that back in order to be able to maintain the infrastructure that we have around EdTech. Teaching and learning, we have been fortunate to have received about $500,000 in state grants over the last couple of years that have allowed us to offset some of the teaching and learning costs for curriculum. And, you know, we're projecting right now that we're going to obviously have to pay for those supplies, materials, and curricular resources. So that's included in this. And then the other of about $100,000 is all of the supply budgets combined across the district for schools, district programs. Really is, and that's just projecting a 3% increase. We actually have reduced them in the last 2 years, and with inflation going up and us reducing budgets, trying to maintain that again is just not going to be realistic for us. So, you know, but all said, in, you know, what we're projecting is just about a $10 million expense budget. We're talking about $500,000 of variable costs that we're going to have to make decisions around. The bigger, you know, challenge for us is clearly going to be in how are we going to manage these fixed costs and what does that mean for the school budget. So basically the way we got to this was looking at, we have about 3.2 million in anticipated revenues and about 10 million if we roll up our costs, and so we have about a $7 million variance this year. I mentioned before, this does not factor in the health insurance trust projections that we're receiving right now, which could impact the total by an additional $1 million. Just want to talk about health insurance briefly, and then I'm going to talk about it later when we do the health insurance trust update. This is more about the FY25 impact. In FY24, health insurance trust right now is going to be requesting and is requesting a January rate increase potentially of 22.8%. I want to say that, 22.8, that's almost a quarter of the rate as a January increase, and $2 million from the town and schools in order to be able to pay the bills. We do not currently have a source of funding for this. We actually did make some progress on it today. So, we'll talk about that more when we get to the HIT piece. But in terms of what that means for FY25, anything we do to cover this year's expenses is going to have to be budgeted for next year. And so the district is going to have to budget for that 22.8% rate increase, which is higher than the 15% we had initially anticipated. And then, but that means that health insurance alone is a $2.8 million increase to our operating budget. And, just go back a slide and I said, we can anticipate about $3.2 million in new revenue. $2.8 million is just employee health insurance. We are going to do everything we can to explore other options, and maybe health insurance trust isn't the right option for us. We don't know yet. But as of right now, this is the projection that we have and what we can rely on. Just to recap, this is our third consecutive year of a shortfall. There have been extraordinary increases to some of our fixed costs, including health insurance and fringes, in-district special education and English language services in the last year or so, out of districts, special education tuitions and transportation, and just inflation. Utilities, supplies, maintenance, capital. Our grants and federal funding either are nearly expired to the tune of about $38,000 left in ARPA, or they have expired already, so that's not a source for us. There is certainly a structural problem that I talked about earlier with the school budget, in that there are some of these costs that are never going up less than 3%, and there's not much we can do about that because it's the world that we're in. And there are also extraordinary circumstances that we've seen this year that we've never seen before. We talked to Steve Noon about this, who's the chair of health insurance, and he presented here last time. He's never seen anything like this in the history of the trust. And so, unfortunately, it's coming at a time when we already know we have a problem. So, at this point, if there's no change to the revenue or reserve usage that we have projected, it's going to have a catastrophic impact on kids. And we can't change that. It's just a fact of the situation we're in. I think it's a very logical question to say what happened and how did we end up here, like why now? So a budget gap is not a new problem. We've had a budget gap for the last 2 years. We anticipated that we'd have a budget gap again. Our reserves are either depleted or are very close to being depleted at this point, at a level that we really can't use more, or we're creating a lot of liability if something happens in future years. Problems are coming in areas that have big numbers. When we talk about health insurance or tuitions for out-of-district costs, those are not small numbers, and when big numbers increase by big percentages, the bad things happen. So health insurance alone makes up $2 to $3 million of the gap, and that's still to be determined. Special education costs are about $2.6 million of that gap. In the special education costs, just to recap, out-of-district tuitions, the state approved the rate increases about 20% over 2 years. Transportation, we have special education, homeless, and foster care transportation needs that we're obligated to meet. In-district student needs that I talked about, where we had to add about $750,000 in staffing after the budget process through circuit breaker reserve. And then, circuit breaker reserve has taken that hit over the last several years as we've seen some of these needs. I think some of what we're seeing in terms of student needs is directly pandemic related. And as kids, came out of the pandemic, we know that our students with disabilities were far more impacted by, disruptions in schooling than were students, who didn't have disabilities. And so really, I think we're seeing a lot of those pressures come to bear. And I think if you talk to any of our staff right now in schools, they would say that even now, even after adding all of these in-district staff, we still don't have what we need for staff to feel like they're really fully serving kids. And then just inflation is the rest of it, and the challenges that we're seeing in inflation. If costs are going up and the budget's going down, sooner or later that breaks. So I think that's really the answer as to why now. 2 big items, and then just a whole lot of cuts that we've seen, and it's coming to roost. Next steps in terms of what we do, we just need school committee direction. Budget guidelines, we just need to have clear priorities from you as to what is important that we need to prioritize. Ultimately, I think what we recognize as administration is, as awful as that job is, we have to come to you with a balanced budget. We cannot guarantee any increases in revenue. What we have to make sure is that within a balanced budget for this community, we have to bring to you something that works. And so we're going to have to make an awful lot of hard decisions, but what we'd like up front and what we need up front is clear priorities from you about what's important. Reserve usage, how much are we going to use? That's going to be a big decision for the group. Fees are certainly going to be on the table. What fees can be increased or introduced to offset some of the costs? And then revenue. What's the direction we're going, and are we going to have to ask towns for more money? I don't know how else to say it, but you know, a $7 million gap, I wouldn't be doing my job for students. You know, I have multiple responsibilities. I have responsibilities to students, I have responsibilities to staff, families, and the community. And right now, to try and balance all of those responsibilities to the broader community and to our students is at a tipping point, I think, for the district. And we're having to make some really hard decisions about that. So that's what I have for you in terms of the budget presentation for tonight. It's certainly super high level. I will honestly admit that to do anything this early in the school year means there's a wider range of variation. You know, there's certainly things in this budget that I think could go $500,000 either way, and you know, I hope we don't get any more emails from Health Insurance Trust, because every email seems to come with $1 million attached to it. But happy to hear feedback, questions, things like that.
Thanks, Peter. Questions from the committee? Tori.
So I hate to say thank you for that, but thank you for that. Having had a boss who once told me bad news doesn't go better with age, we needed to see this. And the work that you've done to put this together this early, to send up the notice that we all need to pay attention and figure this out, is really important. So thank you for laying this out so that we can have a good conversation about what our guidance is going to look like.
No, thank you. I won't talk long, but just briefly, you know, I think we've known for a couple of years that we were going to come to some juncture here where we were going to have a revenue problem, and there just wasn't enough money coming in from the towns to support the schools. If you asked us last spring, we would have said probably, in all honesty, we thought it was at least a year out, if not 2 years out, that we could kind of float on what we had. With some of the extraordinary challenges around special education costs and health insurance, it's just broken that model. And so we're coming back tonight saying, you know, we don't have more levers to pull. We're out of levers.
Andrew.
Peter, yeah, thank you. Thank everybody for putting this together. One of the things that's come up, I think, twice in conversation tonight is the structural problem that exists as part of our budget. And we talk about it, but I think for the sake of the folks that are here and just for the record as we're getting into this discussion, could you explain a little bit about what you mean when you talk about the structural problem within our budget?
Sure. As I said, there's kind of two elements to this. One are the extraordinary things that happened, and I think we've detailed that. When we talk about this idea of a structural problem, it's wrapping our heads around why are school district budgets going up more than 3% if the revenues available to us are capped at 3%, right? And we'd like to think in a perfect world that we could always hold to 3%, but if everything increases 3% within your budget in a perfect world, and then health insurance increases 8% like it did last year, or you know, the combination of Middlesex County and OPEB increases 6.5%, whatever that increase was now has to come out of some other element of your budget. And as costs go up in the world, you can't continue to have some elements of your budget continue to go up without having to always be on a path to reduce. And at some point, that path to reduction breaks, and you're really impacting students in a negative way. And that's the structural problem. And it's real, and it's a criticism of school budgets that's wholly understandable, and yet some of those factors of that are beyond our control too.
I would also like to say thank you for this difficult presentation. Just on a whim, I looked it up. In 2023, education spending at the federal level is 4.3% of GDP. So we can say this is broken from very much the top down. It's not just a state issue. Given one of the questions that came up in public participation, I was wondering if you or Sheri would like to speak a little bit about how carefully and thoroughly you've combed through the budget to make sure that there isn't any misspending and that there is fiscal responsibility.
One thing that's a little different this year is I'm working directly with HR to look at every single piece of the personnel and every single salary. So I worked very closely with Andrew and with Chris Fenneman, and we have gone through every single employee to make sure that we've accounted for everyone. Obviously, the health insurance is a big part of this, and we've been working with that as well. But we made sure that we knew what our Medicare costs were going to be. We knew, you know, if we were doing OPEB again, we knew the 6.5%, and then we looked at actuals for all the utilities and for all of the accounts to try to make sure that we were accounting for everything.
Yeah, I would just echo what Sheri said, is where we basically went line by line, certainly from a personnel standpoint, to make sure what are sort of our contractual commitments, what are the different areas of compensation that would need to be rolled over and that would have increases. I think that we feel very confident that we have fairly accurate numbers. I think the other part that you referenced in terms of the question earlier in public participation, what I took away from that was more of asking sort of not a technical review, but more of a philosophical review of nice to haves versus needs to haves. And I think that's clearly sort of could vary depending on who you ask. I think certainly from our perspective, the positions and the roles that we have are consistent with the goals and the mission that we maintain in terms of the experience that we want to have for kids. There may be individuals who have different takes on whether certain things are critical as part of public education. I think we feel that we wouldn't have them if we didn't think that they had some essential purpose. But I also appreciate that perhaps others have different opinions about that.
Yeah, I'd also like to say thank you for bringing us up sooner rather than later. It seems to me that aside from this, there's also legal obligations that we have financially for a vast majority of this stuff. We have to provide health care, we have to provide transportation, we have to provide numerous things, a plethora of things across the board. And where it really seems, the big piece really seems obviously to be health care. 22.8% increase is just unconscionable, and we all know what that industry is really doing across the board. Is there any way that we can ask the state for assistance with this? I mean, Massachusetts does have good health care in state. Is there any way we could leverage that for, you know, is that not a possibility, or is that?
You know, we'll certainly ask. I don't foresee that happening. Healthcare is, so far as I know, always been considered a local obligation. You know, and I think, you know, I do know we're not the only organization that's experiencing these healthcare challenges right now, and even the large healthcare entities are struggling with costs. But I just don't see the state coming to our rescue, but we will certainly pursue every avenue we can.
Thank you for this information. I just want to step back for a moment to recognize the work of our educators and staff over the past couple of years, and from everything I know, they have done more and more and more with less and under more and more challenging circumstances. And I think that the pandemic learning loss was not solved in a year. It's not solved now. It's still extremely challenging. I especially want to thank our early childhood educators who have done an amazing job for people who, our youngest students who did not experience normal toddlerhood and infancy. And it's not free daycare. It's early childhood education. It has been recognized over and over and over again as absolutely critical to the success of our students. So I want to recognize all of our teachers, but especially our early childhood educators. I also wanted to just ask a question with regard to the incredible increase that the state approved in special education costs. And I know, when that news first came out, it was very shocking and hard to understand how that could have happened. And I don't know if there's been more information on how that happened, or any information about how it is exactly that the state expects districts to absorb that in addition to everything else.
I know, I did hear today that they do still have it on like a state Senate floor, that they're trying to talk about it because more and more superintendents and more school districts are coming forward talking about the extreme expense of out-of-district tuitions. The circuit breaker rules changed about 2 years ago, and they thought they were helping, and they did add a piece of transportation to it. We thought we were going to be reimbursed 75% of transportation, but they are only reimbursing us 57% of the out-of-district transportation. We've continued, even in my group of people, us bean counters, we've continued to kind of go forward and try to talk to anybody that we can to say, it's not just us. All school districts are having this problem. They raised them, they kind of warned us about a year before that the 14% was coming, and they said, well, we ate the cost for a year. But it's still so drastic. And again, as Peter said, we have more and more students that have needs. So all the costs have increased all around. And then they just came out about a month ago with the increases that are almost 5% for next year. So that's where, we're almost at 20%. But we're doing everything we can to have the state help us.
Thanks for all the numbers. So my thinking has gone from there are no budget cuts to complete all 7 million of them. So do we have a kind of an idea of if in the worst case scenario, all 7 million cannot be accommodated, where would the cuts come from? What are the options we have? Which is what I think the general public probably would we need to engage them at that level to say, this is what the pain is going to be. And do we have a value index to each of the things we can associate and say, if this gets cut, this is the benefit we lose for the school district.
I can step in on this one. That's where our budget guidelines are going to come from, which we'll talk about in a little bit, where we basically have to give direction to the school administration that says these are the things that are non-negotiable, or I think in this budget situation there's nothing that's non-negotiable, but here are the things that we want to prioritize as a school committee, and then we need the administration to do another round of this and come back to us and say, here's where we have to make cuts to meet the budget. Here's where we would recommend not making cuts because it protects the guidelines or the items that the committee finds important.
Yeah, I was wondering if it can come the other way around. If the administration can propose what it means so that we can make a more.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that some more in the guidelines, because yes, I think there is a back and forth there, but we have to start.
Okay, thanks.
So I have a question. So first of all, thank you, Peter, Sheri, and Andrew. You've presented to us a problem that looks to be about $7 million, and I'm curious, can you give us some reference? What is the size of a $7 million problem look like? What does the size of a $3.5 million problem look like? How can we put this into some perspective so that we have something more tangible to understand how big this is?
I think, to put it in perspective, when we have to start talking about reductions, there's relatively few areas in a budget that you can reduce that don't become personnel related, which I think is one of the biggest challenges in the school district. When, just to give you a sense of scale, when we have to figure out personnel reductions, we typically are budgeting one personnel reduction at about $72,000. But then we know that in addition, for every X number of personnel we reduce, we have unemployment insurance, which causes another further reduction beyond that. So, when you start doing the math out to what $8 million looks like, because it's actually based on what Health Insurance Trust is telling us, it looks more like 8 than 7. But, that's on a magnitude we haven't seen. I mean, we saw, 2 years ago, I think it was about 14 staff that we ended up reducing. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was somewhere in that. Last year was over 20. But we thought it'd be 30, but we got it down to about 20, which is kind of sadly a win at the time. But when you start talking about this is, 3 times, 4 times that magnitude. So, we're talking big numbers here.
Thanks. All right, so if there aren't any more questions from the committee, please.
I think that was an incomplete answer because we are going to certainly explore all of the things like health insurance. I've already talked to the town manager. We want to put a group together to say, what other options do we have other than health insurance trust? And if we can, like I just a size of scale, going from a 15% projection to a 22% projection, so about 7.5%, that was $1 million for us. So if we can go from a 15% projection down to a 7.5% projection, likewise, we're saving about $1 million on that. And so, there's options to do that too, but we don't know what those are because it's so early and, we're really even just finding out this health insurance information in the last 7 days, 14 days, so.
Thanks. All right, so if there aren't any more questions from the committee, what we're going to do next is hear from finance committees from the 2 towns to get a perspective from the towns, and then we will sit and review our budget guidelines that the budget subcommittees put forward. This is our first read of the budget guidelines, so this is an opportunity for those members who are not members of the budget subcommittee, but also members of the budget subcommittee to come and sort of speak to what we're setting forth as our guidelines, how we want to take this problem and manage it. Yeah. Yes, that's exactly. So that's what I was going to lead into next. I will make the mea culpa here that in all of the craziness to get this meeting sort of rescheduled, we had planned to have Acton FinCom present as well, but forgot to send them a formal invitation. Not even a formal invitation, but just like a, hey, heads up. And so they are going to present at a future meeting, but we're also going to make ourselves available to come to the 2 finance committee meetings and both provide a little bit more context on this, but then as we get further in the process, we would typically come and visit finance committees as well to share with them where we are. So I think we have Tony and Maria. Welcome.
Thank you. Yes, so Tony Newton, I'm the Vice Chair of the Boxborough FinCom. So we just wanted to talk about what our overall guidelines are as we go into the budget process for 2025 in Boxborough. As last year, we want to try to use our free cash. We have some free cash, fortunately, which we use within our guidelines to bring the operating budget down. We are working to reduce our long-term debt requirement, but all of this is underpinned by the fact that we recognise a number of uncontrollable and future potential costs that the town has. There's a water issue in town, a PFAS issue that may need some big remediation costs in future. Education is number 2 on our list here. That's for us an uncontrollable expense. We recognise that the demographics are changing and that Boxborough's increasing enrolment in the school system is increasing our costs to the school system. And as we've heard tonight already, employee benefits, pensions, OPEB are all, I think, common factors that are uncontrollable increases in costs that we see looming against us in future years. So we're trying to be quite conservative in our budgeting going forward to actually make some room for those future anticipated costs. So if we look at 2023 versus 2024, again, you can see that the big increases were education in our budget and a lot of the costs around employees, around retirement funds, employee benefits, OPEB, those sorts of things are things that we saw increase, and we don't have control of that. Our increase for the regional school district last year was 5.2%, again reflecting our increasing enrolment in the school district. So our budget guidelines for this year to the town in general are, we're working to a level service guidance to the town. We're asking for detailed explanation where any additional headcount is added to the town. We are asking the departments to budget to actuals from 2023. So there's some departments actually were underspent last year. So we're saying that you need to come back and work to that number as your starting point, not to come back with your previous budget numbers as your starting point. And of course, we need to factor in cost of living increases on employees. For education, we are giving guidance that we'd like to target a 5.5% increase from last year. This is versus our 5.2% this year. Again, recognising the changing demographics and increases. So that's really what we're trying to sort of work our way towards as our guidance number. That's it.
Excellent. Any questions or comments for the Boxborough FinCom? No? Great. Thank you guys so much for coming.
How you doing? I'm with Acton FinCom. We don't have a presentation.
Excellent. Please have a seat in front of the microphone. And
I don't have any formal material.
That's fine. If you wouldn't mind, though, just turn the mic on so that folks watching at home can hear.
I appreciate the presentation. I did jot down a few questions off of your memo, and I just wanted to follow up on those. So it looks like the personnel increase that you had listed was $4.6 million, and if sort of just back of the envelope math is correct with the cost of living adjustment at 2.75, that would be about 1.9 million of cost of living adjustments. And so then the difference there would be 2.9 million that would not be cost of living adjustment of the personnel increase.
Sheri or Andrew, you want to talk to that?
Yep, so a couple of variables in terms of the personnel increase. First, there is the COLA that's 2.75, but in addition to that, those who are in contracts, whether it's the Teachers Association or our office support or AFSCME, they also have steps and lanes. So there's also increases in individual salaries that are based on increases in years of service, or if they also progress in terms of receiving different educational credits, then they move over across different lanes, and so those increase as well. And then in addition to that, in the personnel budget, it's not just about salaries, it's also about my budget for substitute teachers and other things like that, overtime, et cetera, et cetera.
And can I just give you a little bit more detail on that? So we did include an additional, I think, $200,000 in substitute teachers in the budget because that's how much we were under last year on the line, so we need to try and get that back to zero. We have about $750,000 in special education staff that were added this year after the budget just to meet some of the needs on IEPs. That went into that, and we also, I think we came to Acton FinCom earlier a couple weeks ago and talked about the vacancy factor challenge that we had. So we included a couple $100,000 to try and get ourselves out of that vacancy factor because we think it's an area that's susceptible to, causing a liability in mid-year.
And then maybe asking it a different way is, if those differences that you mentioned, is that for flat head count? Is it net zero FTE ads? I know there's a couple part-time ads in there that you mentioned. I'm sorry, the head count difference of that personnel increase, is that a net add? Are there additional heads being added?
There aren't any additional positions being added in that calculation except for the positions that Peter mentioned that had been added after the FY24 budget had passed. So since then, the numbers that we are providing do not include any anticipated increases in staffing for next year.
Okay. And And then, yeah, I apologize. We could save some of this for later discussion. Just maybe one more quick one. I think you said those 2.6 million for special education, and is that inclusive of the out-of-district tuitions of 1.2, the transportation and then the delta is that number? I think you said 700.
About 750 in
okay.
staff, and then it was about 1.2. I don't have it up in front of me in out-of-district tuitions as an increase, but that's also net of circuit breaker reserve. So we're using less circuit breaker, so it seems artificially high, probably by about half of that. And then transportation is about 600,000 of that too.
Gotcha. Okay, appreciate it. You know, we have a point of view document that is pretty thoroughly vetted, so we could certainly pull a few pieces out to review that. And if you want to come to our meeting too, that's awesome. So appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So again, just thank you to both towns' finance committees for coming tonight and hearing this. Obviously, we've got a long road ahead of us to figure out what our budget's going to look like for next year. The next item for us to deal with actually quite quickly is our budget timeline. So that's in our packet that basically lays out what we'll be doing both in our budget subcommittee's work and then what we'll be bringing to the school committee in the meeting following that. So if we look right now, we're at the November 2nd meeting where we were going to have early budget projections and vote our budget timeline and then have our first read of the budget guidelines. And this timeline basically takes us through from today all the way through to April when we, March when we vote our budget, and then April and May when we have town meetings to get that budget hopefully passed. If there aren't any questions or comments on the budget timeline, I'll take a motion to approve it.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so that was Becca and then Leela. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you. All right, next item is our budget guidelines. So that came out in the addendum because I was feverishly working on them following our budget subcommittee meeting. I think just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I will read them and then we can discuss them. And the point here is to get feedback from the committee in terms of the tone and tenor and the guidelines that we're providing to the administration for their next step. So currently, the budget guidelines read, in recognition of current budget constraints for the town of Acton, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee would like to see the district develop two budget models, one which maintains level services and one which targets the Acton town assessment to 3%. The committee recognizes that a 3% assessment will translate into drastic cuts to our current service model. The committee is still committed to the strategic goals set for our schools, and we will continue to prioritize those as budgets permit. We will continue to advocate broadly for the resources needed to provide an equitable and exemplary education for our students. Considering the size of the budget gap to close for FY25, the committee understands that all areas for savings need to be considered. Cuts in areas that don't directly affect students should be evaluated first. The committee recognizes that it is necessary to be open to cuts that do have a direct effect on students and district strategic goals. It is requested that the administration provide some reference to the scope and scale these cuts will have on student learning and strategic goals. The following items are a summary of the strategic goals for the district as referenced in previous budget guidelines. Ensure students have access to a robust system of supports for their social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs and for their academic needs. Continue to fund work to promote all students' sense of belonging through a strong and inclusive school climate and culture. Provide resources that continue to address disproportionate outcomes for students who have been historically underserved by schools. That's the guidelines as they stand currently. Questions, comments from the committee? Lakshmi, I know you had some questions, thoughts before about budget guidelines.
No, I think this is well written. Agree.
Thank you. Yanshin, anything?
I actually had a comment previously. I would like to ask everybody who is a volunteer for the town and the schools to raise their hands, please. All of us. I know that from hearing my colleagues, what you saw at the national level and the state level, that we are, the educators, the volunteers, we're trying to look out for each other. I know it is the state legislation and the federal government moves in a glacial speed, but I ask people who are watching this video or who are in this meeting room today to write to your representatives and tell them that stop pitting the citizens against each other. We're trying our best. We do want to look out for our families, our students, and our staff. We need help from up top. So it's not a comment for the guideline, it's just a comment for the process.
Thank you.
I do have one question on this. So could we play with the numbers? If we have to accommodate all 7 million, with no cuts to service, that's what we're talking about, right? What would be the burden on the towns? How much do they have to go back and ask the community to kind of raise taxes?
So if I understand your question, your comment, what you'd like to see in the guidelines is what the result would be in terms of a request to the 2 towns?
Yeah, we said 3%, right? So how much more than the 3% are we looking at?
So I think that will come as part of the budget process as we start to see the superintendent's preliminary budget in early January.
Okay.
When that budget comes to us, it gets broken down, and then it broken down to then our sources of revenue, which Peter highlighted, and then the assessments to the town. So we see that as part of the budget process.
Okay.
I don't know if it makes sense to put that as part of the guidelines, because it's really just part of the process.
Yeah.
But that will come for sure.
Okay.
And what we've put in our guidelines is we would like the district to provide us with 2 budget paths. One is a level service, which is the 7 million gap, and then the 3% assessment. And so those 2 paths would then have an output of assessments to the towns.
Okay, and those will map to how much tax assessment raise would be?
I don't know, would it match to how much taxes? No, I think that then comes as part of the town's planning and how they then fund those 2 assessments from the district. And so we would have to, and that would be when we would go back to the town's select boards and finance committees and then discuss what that would look like. And their ability and willingness to pay that. And so that's part of what the process that the Acton Leadership Group does from the Acton side, to look at all of those inputs and what the output is, and it's what the Boxborough Finance Committee and leadership do as well.
We can't even play with the hypothetical scenarios here.
I mean, what do you mean?
I mean, we're not talking about going back to towns, finance committees and select boards and kind of negotiating, just an idea of where this will lead us to.
I think that happens later in the process. I think it's still a little too early, and it's not necessarily part of what we would say for our guidelines, right? Right now, what we're trying to do is give the district direction into what we need for them to present for us to then go and have those conversations with our towns and have that back and forth to see how we close the gap.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm assuming that you talked to Peter about this, but I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Does this give you the direction that at this point, you know, that is helpful to you, or do you need more information from us, or what are your thoughts?
So in terms of how we work through the budget process, you know, we have budget sheets out to all of the principals and department heads around the district, which is where they tell us what their needs are. You know, those are still, you know, pending, coming back from them. And then over the next couple of weeks, we have a series of meetings to meet with every principal, along with, you know, central office staff, to kind of understand building requests and budgets. And then we have, you know, a half-day budget workshop with our leadership team in mid-November, where we actually will take all of this and try and put together a budget that, you know, like we kind of know, I mean, this idea of a level service budget, it's what we showed you tonight. It's, you know, right now we're projecting a $7.5 to $8 million gap. You know, are there things that will shift and that will go in some direction? Sure. And we'll hone that as numbers get more reliable. But that's the gap for level services that we know of today. The budget that targets the assessment at 3%, that means we're going to take whatever the gap you saw is, and we're going to figure out what to do with it. There's nothing I feel confident in right now. I mean, quite honestly, I think we're going to have to look at just about every phase of what we do. And you know, I don't think there's anything that people would come out with that they say they feel good with. But the team will certainly put that together and bring it forward, and we'll say, here's what it looks like. Now, I think there's going to have to be a lot of give and take through that process with the committee. You know, there's nothing you can tell us concrete right now that's going to tell us, do this, this. We're going to have to just kind of test different things. You know, I think the one thing, you know, we think about, and I apologize for the long answer, but I think it's important. There's two levers that we have as a school district to reduce budgets. One is class size, and the other is programs and services. And so you can say you're only going to do, you just increase class size, but keep all of the programs and services. But there's some tipping point to class size that now no longer makes sense when you say, that's not right. And you could say maintain class sizes at all costs, but you're inevitably soon going to be into programs and services that people find really important to provide, and you're going to say, well, there's a balance. So I actually think a lot of the work we're going to have to do is looking hard at a combination of class sizes at all levels and programs and services at all levels, and figuring out how do we get all of that to add up to that $7.5 to $8 million range. So yeah, I mean, we know what the challenge is. I don't think there's a guideline that's going to make it much easier.
I'll share a little bit too, sort of our process to get to this guideline, because it's quite dissimilar to previous guidelines, which were almost a bulleted list of do this, or protect this, protect that. And we got to the point at our meeting on Monday where we said, everything has to be on the table. And, you know, as much as I have this challenge every year where I kind of want like an a la carte menu of budget items. And there's just a few items that we look at when it sort of comes down to it, like, well, what does this one do? What does this one do? How much does this one cost? How much does that one cost? I don't know if we're going to get that this year because everything has to be considered. And so we sort of changed pretty drastically the way we wrote the guidelines, which was to say, this is a really tough year. We're still dedicated to our strategic goals, which we list out there. But other than that, we have to sort of leave it to the administration to come back to us and say, this is what it looks like to change class sizes, and then what's the effect on teaching and learning. This is what it means to cut programs, and what's the effect on the outcome for our students. This is what it means to not address capital needs, and what does that mean for our facilities, and what are, you know, all of those other subgroups that have expertise or deep information in that can then provide the context around what each one of those cuts means. But there's going to be a lot if, you know, for that second option of a budget, which is the 3% assessment, there's $7 million in cuts. So I think we purposely left the guidelines broad to say, do your best to protect our three strategic goals. But beyond that, what does it look like to get to a balanced budget? Andrew and then Tori.
Thanks, Adam. You know, to follow on what you're saying, I think a lot about what Kira used to talk about in her comment about how, in previous sessions, about how a budget is a moral document. And as we look at the guidelines that are here, I recognize there's a tension between creating an environment that fulfills our charge to create full people through the district, and also ensuring that the environment is run as efficiently as possible. And I think the guidelines recognize both responsibilities. They both set the stage for the district to shape great people and to be responsible for the trust that we've been given by our towns. These schools are the center of our community. They set the tone. They create the cultural touch point for everything in our towns. I think the guidelines do a nice job of being able to focus and provide enough flexibility to fulfill on those promises. Thanks.
I think the way I was thinking about this as we were wrestling with it, I appreciate using our goals because that's something that we've all decided as a group. These are the things that are important to us, but it also helps provide a measuring stick. None of these are going to be a yes or a no. It's going to be how much, how well, how soon, how much of a delay. And I think it allows us also to capture impact, because that's going to be one of the conversations that we need to have when we are talking to everyone in the community is, you know, these are the cuts that we're looking at in order to pass a budget that we know we can fund, and here's the impact. Is that worth it to us? Because ultimately, we have to have that conversation, and then we can figure out where we go from there. So yeah, I see it as a measuring stick, and I see it as, you know, the unified thing that we've agreed are important, our goals.
Thanks. Any last comments or questions on the guidelines? Vikram? All right, so like I said, this was the first read, so if you have additional feedback, please feel free to send it to myself or Rebecca, and then we'll have an opportunity with the Budget Subcommittee to go through it one more time before we bring it for a vote at, I think, our next meeting. Wonderful. Thank you all for that. Next item is school committee communication goal update. So I do want to touch on this one because we missed the opportunity at our last meeting. And so I did want to get some feedback from committee members who were present at Oktoberfest and the Walk Against Hate to share a little bit about what you experienced, what you talked with community members about. Ginny.
Thank you. I think that they were both great successes. I was at both of those events. With regard to Oktoberfest, you talked to a lot of different people. I tried to especially have conversations with people who do not have children in the school system right now, who either will at some point or did. I asked everybody I talked to why they lived in Acton, and there was not a single person that I talked to who did not move here for the schools. And I think that I actually was speaking to a realtor who graduated from AB 10, 15 years ago, came back and is now selling property, and I asked him if that was, that squared with what he's hearing from clients who are moving in, and he said absolutely. So I think it's just important to understand that, our schools are what animates this town, and is what it impacts our property values. It's precious, and it's something that we need to treat as such. It was wonderful to talk to a lot of community members, and I let them know that we wanted to have these conversations, especially because the budget year was going to be extremely difficult, and people were receptive to that. And had a lot of questions. So I think it's really important work for us all to continue doing. If nothing else, then to just raise awareness now, especially that we don't really have a paper anymore. And with regard to the Walk Against Hate, it really was a heartwarming but also distressing event, just in that it has to happen at all. But it was a great turnout, and there was a lot of energy and a lot of young people, and just really applaud the students who were there and dedicated to that. Thank you.
One other thing about the Walk Against Hate that was particularly interesting was the number of different groups that were there. It wasn't just school, it wasn't just school committee, it wasn't just the folks from one temple or one place, but we had people from all over, from all different styles. And it showed how the point of view of being against this type of stuff is greater than just one group, and showed the voice of the community. And our representatives were there and were very involved and very talking, from Simon to Dan to Jamie. It was, again, a nice opportunity to see how the whole culture, the whole community could come out together in a single voice.
Thanks. Anybody else want to share? Mention?
I think Becca, Andrew, and I enjoyed hanging out together and speaking to the residents here. One thing that I did say at Oktoberfest, and I want to repeat that, is that we would like to ask the residents in Acton-Boxborough to stay engaged throughout this whole entire budget process. Going to the town meeting, it's going to be an up and down vote, but if you stay engaged throughout the process, you would know what we've discussed, and if you have any concerns, questions, please ask now.
Thank you. All right, I will take any individual suggestions in terms of what might be good next communication items for us to do for outreach. Clearly, we've got some work to do around explaining what's happening with the budget and the gap there. So please email me individually, and then maybe at our next meeting we can talk about what are some actions that we can take next, sort of for the next round of outreach to the community, both what we're going to be talking about. Regards to the FY25 budget, but there are some pretty significant impacts for this year's budget as well. So, Peter, did I vamp enough for you to get ready to go?
You did, and you know, I'll just continue to play the role of Grim Reaper here, which is fitting for Halloween. No, in all seriousness, it's actually not a funny topic, but you know, at this point, numbers shift every day. But I want to give you an update to the most recent information coming out of Health Insurance Trust. We received this information from the consultant after Steve Noon came and presented at the last school committee meeting. The Health Insurance Trust met. At that meeting, they actually voted to request $2 million from both the town and schools. But in addition, they asked the health insurance consultant to advise them about what else needed to happen. So just want to give a little bit of an overview of what's going on with Health Insurance Trust. So ultimately, HIT is seeing an above normal number of high cost claimants on both of our health insurance plans. So the 3-month average per employee per month claim increases have been running 16% over for Blue Cross Blue Shield and 33% over for Harvard Pilgrim plans. HIT at this point does not have sufficient funds in the trust to pay the last month worth of claims. So, which is, I think, something that Steve was hinting at potentially seeing coming, but they didn't have the invoices yet. Well, they had the invoices, and at this point, I think the numbers were roughly 3.2 million in claims and about 2 million in cash on hand, you know, rough numbers. So that's a significant problem. I want to emphasize right now, employees are not at risk of losing health insurance. That's not the issue we're dealing with, but it is a big problem that's going to need to be solved, and you know, relatively soon. There were 2 options that the consultant returned to the Health Insurance Trust. Both of the options included a $2 million payment from the town and schools to the trust, and that was voted last week by the trust to make that request, so we're waiting on that. Just to give you a sense of the scale of that, you know, right now we're thinking that we're somewhere between 60 and 78% of the claims based on, you know, the dollar value of how health insurance breaks down. So that $2 million will largely be on the district, is what we're anticipating. In addition to the $2 million though, option 1, which was not the preferred option, was that on January 1st, there'd be a 13.2 rate increase, 13.2% rate increase, and then an additional 18.6% rate increase on July 1st. Those were considered minimum rate increases and not final. They would actually need to watch the trust as it went through the year in terms of projecting out what would happen. In option 2, which is the preferred option, there'd be a January 1st of this year, so January 1st, 2024, rate increase of 22.8%, and that rate would continue into the next school year. What does that mean for us? Well, the cost of a 22.8% rate increase for the district is about $1.4 million. The cost to employees ranges based on the plans that they have. I can't think of a time when there's been mid-year rate increases to health insurance, let alone in the 20 to 25% range. You know, by all guesses, when we looked at our plans, we're thinking that's probably somewhere in the order of $700 to $1,700 just for a 6-month period. So these are significant burdens for everyone. Cost to the district, if we picked up that portion of it, would be about almost $500,000 more. So that's something that, you know, certainly we can talk about doing, but we need to understand the reality of the financial situation we're in too. In terms of the $2 million payment, on the low end, maybe 1.2 million. We think more realistically, it's closer to 1.6 million that the district would be on the hook for in terms of a cost share. So we're estimating right now that our total liability right now could be 2.6 to 3 million, and that's an FY24 liability, so the current year. That needs a lot of validation, but that's kind of what we're thinking based on our projections. You know, we have next steps that are going to have to get taken, so we need additional information from HIT, and they are scheduled to meet on November 9th, so we'll get more information from HIT then. I talked to town manager in Acton, and you know, we both believe that, you know, bringing in maybe an additional analyst that's independent of HIT at this point is probably beneficial too, to just take a look at the overall, what's going on with claims, overall financial position of trust and advise, you know, us and the town of Acton about logical next steps, including what do we do next year, and is this viable to continue. We also think that our school committee needs to discuss the options available to us to identify how we're going to come up with, you know, 2.5 to 3 million potentially in funds. I actually have some positive news on that that I'll share as well, so that's not hopeless. And then we also think that the town and schools should urgently convene a joint committee to study what our long-term options are beyond just FY24 in solving this. Is the trust the best option continuing, or are there other options that we need to do? We think it's important to bring in all of the heads of the different labor organizations as well into that process, town, schools, and just, you know, see what we can come up with for the future. I'll just expand a little bit on number 3 there, you know, funding mechanisms. One of the things we explored, and we actually really just got to it today, and again, it's so early and this is just preliminary information, but it does look like there's a possibility that we can actually use the OPEB trust fund to fund some of this liability. We have about $9.5 million now in the OPEB trust that is earmarked for retirees' health insurance. So it can't be used for any other purpose than that. But we spoke with both our analyst for the OPEB trust and the actuary that does all of our calculations today. And thank you, Sheri, for setting up both of those. She has been working on this all day long, every day. As has Andrew, and probably me and several other people. But based on what the actuary told us, we should be able to actually be reimbursed for the full amount the district paid in last year for our retirees' health insurance through our general fund, which is just over $2 million. So literally just over $2 million. So we probably could take out $2 million out of the OPEB trust to be able to fund. We also had earmarked about $900,000 in the FY24 budget to go into OPEB. We've only paid about $225,000 of it so far, so we've put a hold on paying anything else out, and that could give us, you know, potentially another, you know, $500,000 that we could put into it. We also have a current year health insurance liability because we had 28 employees take health insurance this year that didn't last year. So, you know, we're certainly going to have to pay off that liability too, but that's, you know, kind of where we're at right now. So we have, you know, potentially, if all of this works, you know, all but about 350 or so thousand of this accounted for. But it's not a pretty way to get there, and it's certainly not a pattern that we want to encourage.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to go to Ben. I just want to recognize that if I were to put myself in the shoes of someone who's been on the committee for 1 or 2 years, and we're talking about OPEB and trusts and withdrawals and all of these things, there's a lot of mechanisms here that are probably not familiar to many of the folks on the committee. We probably don't have the time right now to go through what all that means. So I think that as we work through the solution, it would be helpful to explain some of those mechanisms, and particularly what the upsides and the downsides are for using those mechanisms. Ben.
Thanks, Adam. Quick question, Peter. By taking from the OPEB trust $2 million, what is the long-term impact? I know that in looking at the OPEB trust or the OPEB fund where I work, it swings greatly year to year based off of the actuarial reports. Is there going to be a long-term impact on our retirees' health insurance and being able to cover those costs?
I mean, the OPEB trust isn't set to be fully funded until 2050 something. So we're a long way from fully funding it anyway, so I don't think that's actually the risk. I think maybe the more immediate thing is the, rating agencies that give bond ratings to districts don't like seeing OPEB trusts dipped into. From what we talked to the trust advisor about, he said, a one-time action like that probably isn't going to raise the ire of the rating agencies, but if that was a pattern that they saw several times, that would cause some concern. But I think, dwindling reserves and not being able to pay your budgets are equally concerning to the same rating agencies, so.
Other comments? Andrew.
Thank you. Regarding the next steps you have here, the current consultant that we have, Gallagher, is currently in process of doing number 2, going back through and reviewing claims, as well as looking at additional aspects. My suggestion would be that if we do go through this list and working with the town manager, that number 4 provide direction to them for number 2 to be able to allow us to make a better decision as to where to go next. Additionally, we are at the, this is part of the reaction to what happened with the pandemic. There were about 3 years when people didn't do preventative medicine, 3 years when people didn't go to the doctor very often, and we saw a 45% claim increase over the same time last year. So it's not just the numbers you saw there, but in general, a 45% claim increase. Because of the lack of preventative medicine, because of the way that people were dealing with other aspects of their lives, we are now having people with worse issues in health that have to be taken care of. And while there are cash flow options that are being managed and other tricks and levers that are trying to be pulled to be able to get things under control, we're stuck in a pretty bad situation that may level off or may grow a little bit more.
Thanks. Anyone?
I think, the one piece about how this works, whether it's through health insurance trust or another committee, I think one of the things we have to be cognizant of is there's some legal requirements around changes to health plans where there are different groups that have to be sitting at that table too. So I think John and I both have some questions as to whether health insurance trust alone should be the entity to do that or whether we need a broader entity.
I agree with you entirely. That's why I think the number 4 should drive what happens, but we have a set of consultants that are working specifically in that space as experts to understand that area. So we don't have to go out and buy another group. We may be able to use existing resources.
Other comments, questions? I want to come back just quickly to the almost 25% rate increase that affects not just the district, but every employee who takes health insurance from us. I think it would be pretty drastic, particularly in the middle of the year without an option to go to open enrollment and change your plan options to have to pay that significant increase in health insurance. So I'm curious what the committee's thoughts are on how we can help manage that for our employees. Okay, so what I'd like to see then, as part of the options, right, as we're starting to see what the options will be in terms of how we fund the liability, is what does it look like to try and support our employees in some way, shape, or form in this rate increase as well, through no fault of their own, no fault of ours, no fault of anybody's. But I mean, if my employer came to me and said, oh, by the way, I'm going to take an extra $700 out of your pay this year for health insurance, I would not be happy. And I'm sure it would not help with employee retention to do that. So I'd love to see that as an option as we start to finalize some more of how we're going to fund this. I'd like to be able to see what that means, both in terms of where those funds could come from and what it may mean to our current year budget. All right, any other questions or comments on the health insurance trust update? No. Capital Subcommittee update. Ben.
October 25th, 2023, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee's Capital Improvement Subcommittee convened. In the meeting, we discussed various topics with the leaking administrative roof or building roof as the top priority. The meeting also covered the high school rooftop units, tennis court repairs, current outstanding bonds, and plans for the FY25 capital budget. The next meeting is scheduled for November 22nd, and the subcommittee voted to adjourn at 8:20 a.m.
Thank you. Leela, it says here that you've got an update for Policy Subcommittee.
Yeah, I saw that on the agenda. The budget sub met on October 26th at 7:30 in the morning, had an opportunity to engage school leadership in policy discussions around personal tech devices like cell phones that weren't previously approved for students to access school content. And then we also talked about including students in the discussion. Our next meeting is Tuesday, November 7th at 7:30 in the morning, and we are meeting on Zoom.
Thank you. As if we didn't hear enough about budget already this evening. Rebecca, do you have an update or a...
I unfortunately was not there at the budget subcommittee meeting on Monday because I was sick.
That's right. I'd be happy to share what we did.
Yeah.
We discussed everything that we discussed this evening and went over our budget guidelines. That was pretty much the crux of our budget subcommittee meeting. Yeah.
Just to also let you know, and I included the memo in an email to you earlier today, but knowing our health insurance situation for the year, I did put a full spending freeze on the district until we can sort that out. So, there are certainly essential things that are going to continue to need to be purchased, but any purchasing at this point requires prior written authorization from Sheri before it goes into payroll. Otherwise, we are fully frozen, and we'll sort out health insurance as fast as possible, but certainly know that, we don't know what that actually means for the rest of the budget year as well.
Thank you. Yes, mention.
Hi, Peter, I saw the memo this afternoon for the budget freeze. I guess my question is that as parents of the children in the schools, is there anything we can do to help? We don't want our educators to pay out of pocket for supplies.
All of this is evolving in the last 24 hours or so, let me think about that a little bit. I also, know that we're working quickly to try and resolve the healthcare piece, and if we can resolve that, and certainly we're still, if a school runs out of construction paper, are we going to buy construction paper? Yes. If there's blue construction paper but someone wants yellow, they're going to use blue. Right? Like, we're going to purchase the essential things that we need to make sure we're continuing to educate kids, but it needs to go through Sheri for the meantime to make sure that we're sticking to the essentials.
Thank you. Okay, we're on to our consent agenda items, and this is a reminder for that person who wants to read the warrants later to get that pulled up onto their computer. So, items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I'll read each item, and if a member would like to hold it, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended meeting to vote on the minutes. Item number 1, approval of the ABRHS meeting minutes of 10/19/23. Item number 2, approval of the Acton-Boxborough Friends of Music and Acton-Boxborough Friends of Drama to support the ABRHS Performing Arts Program. And item number 3, approval of the donation from the Town of Littleton LELD Littleton Electric Light Department to Blanchard Elementary Playground. Given that no items were held, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
Second.
Wow. So we're going to start all over again, and I'm going to ask someone to turn their microphone and say it clearly so that the people watching at home and Beth, who's taking our minutes, can...
So moved. Seconded.
Okay, so that was Ben and Vikram. Thank you. All of those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? There are none. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Statement of warrants and recommendation to approve. Does anybody have that up and ready to read? Rebecca.
Just love reading them. I move that the school committee vote to approve the below listed warrants totaling $5,210,680.15. AP vendor warrants as follows: 24-008A dated 10/12/2023 in the amount of $214,008.33. 24-008B dated 10/19/2023 in the amount of $734,499.73. Payroll vendor warrant as follows: 24-008PR dated 10/19/2023 in the amount of $1,242,996.09. Payroll warrant as follows: P2408 dated 10/19/2023 in the amount of $3,012,439. Arbiter sports warrant as follows: 24-008AS dated 10/19/2023 in the amount of $6,737.
Second.
Leela seconded that. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That is also unanimous. Peter, is there anything in the FYI that you want to highlight?
No.
Awesome. I will just add, thank you to the member of the community who asked for us to be sure to upload all of our presentations from tonight. So we did have a lot of last minute additions and presentations. Our practice now is for the memos to go into the packet and the presentations will go into the packet after the fact. So once we recover from the preparation for this evening's meeting, we will get all of those items added back into the packet and posted up online with our agenda. With that,
move to adjourn.
Seconded.
That would be Tori and Ben. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening.